Welcome to our weekly heliogenesis call. Here we want to unite in shaping the heliogenic civilization. We see this as a future grounded in natural processes, open access, and regenerative practices. And our mission here with heliogenesis is to illuminate the trailblazers and initiatives, people and projects dedicated to constructing this new world through their infrastructures of generosity. And in today's session, our first session of this kind, we are greeting Project Miracle as our guest. Project Miracle is contributing to several pathways and infrastructures of generosity. One being the pathway from the current economic extractive model to the economic model of sovereignty. From the other pathway is from a transactional money-based economy to a relational care and gift economy. And maybe also in the field of governance, potentially less so, from politics to agency. Before we begin, I want to do some housekeeping. So this session is recorded and will be available on YouTube. Please keep yourself muted so it's smooth and uninterrupted for everyone. We will start with the presentation of Project Miracle, which is then followed by a few opening questions coming from me, and then we will pass it over to all of us to ask questions. Please raise your hand. I will ask you to unmute. And if you don't feel comfortable being public on YouTube, then please indicate that in the chat with your question. I will ask that on your behalf. So with that, and without any further ado, Malte, on behalf of Project Miracle, would you like to take over?
Start.
Stage is yours.
Yeah, hi. So hi, wait 1 second, I'm trying to share my screen very fast. Can you all see that? Probably in, but not in full screen, right? Okay, let's do it.
Now it works.
Is it full screen or not? Okay.
Yes, if you close the navigation bar of Arc, then it's more or less in full screen.
Ah, sweet. Okay, so my name is Malte. I'm part of one of the heliogenesis guy, and I'm mostly responsible for Project Miracle in our little team. And little background, a little bit about me, probably. So I talked last week a bit who I am, and my background is mostly in tech startups for plus 10 years, and also part of a few impact investing initiatives. One impact fund in New Zealand where we invest in a bunch of impact startups from all different categories. I'm also part of an Indian initiative for philanthropy, and we're trying to frame a little bit what we're trying to do today, and approximately like in 20 minutes, let's say. And last week, Thomas already talked like how can we actually move our economy towards a care economy, and we have a bunch of different projects that we're working on at the moment. One of it is building homes and building futures, which is an investment fund that we set up I think a few months ago, and we probably officially will launch it in May this year. And our general thesis is that we provide investments to companies and research initiatives dedicated to creating a global economy based on an open and free nature based material. And little of an information, what we will have this year is a fund that is approximately 3 to 5 million big, and we annually will invest into 10 to 15 projects. The fund is in a partnership with Catapult. Catapult is one of the leading impact investment companies in Europe. They I think they invest in around 100 different companies every year, something like that. I'm not sure with all the numbers, but they're quite big. And with them and some sovereign wealth funds, we want to create a larger fund within the next 5 to 10 years, where we can fully um, make the heliogenesis civilization boom. So what's the difference between us and some other investment funds? So one of the things is that we, as a impact fund, we invest our profits into our nonprofit organization, which is heliogenesis, so that all of the profit that we earn from our company actually goes back into a nonprofit. Then we can use it to liberate other projects. So we're not dependent on investments all the time. So we create like a little flywheel for heliogenesis. And one of the major theses that we have is we want to build free homes for at least 300 million people that will be climate refugees within the next 20 to 30 years. And there are some other numbers that goes up to like 1.5 billion people who will losing their homes because of climate change. And we thought, okay, we actually have to do something against that. So we said, okay, actually having an investment fund within this system, we can make heliogenesis faster than we actually thought. And I think it was also one question last week, what we're actually trying to do. And we have different categories and projects where we're trying to identify how can we have the biggest leverage effect for heliogenesis. And one of it is actually like an investment fund to invest in research and projects. So empowering hundreds of millions with free regenerative building materials is one of the major goals of Project Miracle. So I said a little bit about that as well. So why are we doing that? What are actually the problems that we have at the moment? Last week we talked a lot about materials. Actually, no, we didn't talk a lot about materials. I will do that now a little bit. So the environmental impact of materials is quite high. So 35% of global biodiversity loss and water stress is related to material extraction. And especially in Europe, buildings lead to 40% material extraction and 30% of water waste. And it is approximately 14 gigatons of CO2 every year only in the building sector. So the whole material world that we have has one of the largest impact on our environmental landscape. And at the same time, when we talk about the economy, 99% of GDP is related to energy, the usage of the energy. That means production, materials that we extract, also like working with materials. So, and almost 100% is related to materials. So if we really want to change something in the world, we have to change how we produce materials in the world. And the other thing why I think it's a challenge on the long-term perspective is that we will have a lot of geopolitical tensions between countries because everyone is fighting for minerals and materials in the future. There was a few reports from Lars showed them a few weeks ago about Norway and other countries that they're trying to build up their own strategy for materials because they're not able to, or they think they will not be able to get all the materials that they need in the future from countries like China or Africa. And then usually as an impact investment fund or a lot of people, they say, hey, why not renewable? So just invest a lot into renewable energy and all our problems will be fixed. One of the major problems with that is that they require a lot more energy and materials than, for example, coal or nuclear plants. So to get fully electric or run the economy fully by renewables, we would need a lot of more materials that we don't have, or we have to extract very expensively, or with energy that we don't have within the next few years. So for us, it's like, okay, renewables is not an option, but what can we actually do? to get into that, like into a solution as a fund. And where we want to get is we want to move our current economic model to a circular and care economy. And we want to purely focus on new regenerative materials. That means that all the materials that we produce, they are biodegradable and they are living in kind of a symbiosis with nature. We want to, as a fund, we want to push forward the policy towards like circular economy, regenerative materials, which has a lot to do with government things because especially in Germany, you have a lot of restrictions for materials. So they have to be like go through TÜV and a lot of certificates that you need. So I think there has to be like a push by the government and policy to be actually able to use also materials in the future. Collaborative investments means for us that we actually starting working with like governments together, local authorities to make the project that we invest possible, so that they immediately have like a local effect on the economy. And this is basically then the long-term vision for change for us. And on the right side, we can see why this is so important for us. When we talk about the care economy, we always think about, okay, how can we actually move towards an economy that is very different from the model that we have? And what I said earlier is that everything we touch, everything we use, even if we work in a software company or at Facebook, like it still has to do a lot with materials that they use for data farms or they build a marketplace for something. Everything that we touch actually still has to do something with materials and energy. So if we want to unlock humanity towards a heliogenous society, we have to decouple ourselves from materials and GDP. Not for materials, sorry. We have to decouple ourselves from GDP. And one of the best ways to do that is we don't extract materials anymore. So we start growing them by ourselves. And we use more nature materials that we rather build in a lab environment, or we can build in our living room, similar to making kombucha, for example. And if we have this building block within the next 10 to 20 years, we can move towards different kind of capital, for example, or we can start thinking about new economic models or other kind of thing. And based for us as an investment fund, I thought about a few principles that we're following that fits into the heliogenesis civilization. So first of all, everything that we're trying to invest has to be rather with low energy solutions, or we have to harness direct sunlight. That means, for example, using bacteria to strengthen certain materials, or using fermentation process or algae as an example to grow things. Because one of the problems that I mentioned earlier is we do not have the energy to produce a lot of the things, for example, renewables. So there's something called energy density. And as long as the energy density is low, for example, from renewables, it is impossible to produce steel from it or heat an oven that is strengthening cement or concrete, as an example. So we want to use the process that is inspired by nature, so sun plus something else, to produce the materials. And in best case scenarios, we want to empower local communities with that. So every company or research that we invest, they have to be inspired by the process of nature. They have to use sunlight. And then it must be possible that every solution that we have, that we can replicate the same thing in a local community, so they don't depend on, okay, we have to produce this in China, this in Africa, and then we manufacture it in Germany, for example. So the solution has to be the capacity that we actually produce it in a local environment by just changing the bacteria, for example. The fourth point is AI and material science. It is kind of complicated to do all the computing and understand like how can we use nature process for that. So AI can be a big help to understand what nature is doing for two things. Nature is doing something incredibly good. So, and especially in two things, nature can produce sophisticated and different materials from the same atom, like for example, silk. It can produce silk that is very soft and you can use it for fashion, for example. But at the same time, it can use the same atoms, but just in a different variation to produce hard materials, for example, like a table, let's say. And to do that, it is important to understand like, okay, what else can we use in nature? And that's why I think like building a language model for materials could be quite beneficial for us. And especially also to understand like how can we communicate with nature in a few years or with bacteria, similar that we talk to computers. But that's a little bit maybe too broad. And the fifth point is everything that we invest, like every project has to be open source. That means that it's probably clear what it is. So like every investment, they don't have any, they have patents or IP, but everyone is open to use it. So if we invest in a company in the US and they have a great solution for example, let's say cleaning water or salt water in a container with bacteria, for example, we would be able to replicate the same thing and use that in different countries as well, so everyone can have access to this technology. And I think this is very important if we want to build like the new foundation of materials that we grow in our garden, for example. And then three examples I figured out that we talked to. So all the three of them, they're making pretty much similar things, let's say. They're all building kind of building blocks, except for microbiome. But so Zempler, for example, they reducing the carbon emission by 70% for concrete and building blocks. And they build something similar to Lego. So everyone can actually just not print, but build their own Lego block in their backyard, and then they can stack them together and build their own house. And what they use is kind of a geopolymer and a carbon carbicide process. So they're trying to use as much local materials as possible and then add a few things to it. And then they're pretty much building houses everywhere. And they're huge in Africa. Let's say not huge, but they're trying to do a lot of like social housings in Africa. A great company and an example of like, okay, this could be a heliogenesis company. Then a different approach is Prometheus. It's I think a Chicago-based firm. What they do is they first produce algae, and then they use the algae and a carbon calcite process as well to strengthen the algae. And from that, they have building blocks as well. And what you can see here in the background is actually this is all built with their materials. So this is all algae, what you see here, which I think is just impressive. And it is carbon neutral. It grows in little glass things. Sander can talk a lot more about algae, but it's a great way to actually produce materials. And it only or mostly use sunlight for it. There was a big project in Germany with Arup as well. They were doing similar things. So, and then we have Microbiome, which is a company by Sarah Richardson. She's one of the most fascinating persons in the bacteria space. She has some great talks on YouTube if you're interested in that. She tries to use only bacteria to fix most of the problems that we have with society, especially in climate change. So she works on she works, for example, on biofuel alternatives. She works on a project for building concrete as well, and also on different green chemical alternatives for nitrogen and fossil fuel to transition into a fully a bio-based world. And those are just three examples that I thought would be interesting, and they're already at a stage where you can just Google it, and you find a lot of more about the company. So I think within the last 2 years, we assembled a big list with probably 100 more companies and research projects that working in similar fields. And if you're interested, we can easily share that with you as well or talk more about it. And yeah, those are just like a few examples. And yeah, without systemic redesign, we will not be able to remain within the planetary boundaries. So to actually shift towards something new, we have to fully rebuild the material stack that we're currently operating on to actually move further. Otherwise, with 2 to 3% of GDP growth every year, we will just use a shitload of more materials in the next 50 years. So to fully yeah, and in here, this is probably the last slide is just what is the opportunity as an investment fund or for limited partners, for example. Even if what we're trying to do, it's could be like a billion opportunity. I know it's a 1.8 trillion euro opportunity for investors. It's one of the least financed sector at the moment, deep tech and materials, but it has actually a lot of benefits compared to SaaS companies or AI, for example. And just if we want to operate within the, let's say, the carbon budget that we have to reduce the materials that we use now by 94% just to not use more carbon that we have at the moment to keep on path on the Paris Agreement path. So that would mean that we probably stop everything that we're currently doing as a society, which I think will not be possible. So we have to switch to a new system. And right now, the global economy is only 7.2% circular, and actually this number is declining. And at the same time, we use much more materials because our GDP and population is growing. So it's not getting better, but to get there, we have to focus much more on circular projects and investments. And yeah, that's basically what we're trying to do with Project Miracle here. So we're having an investment fund that is dedicated to helping in a few years hundreds of millions climate refugees, and we're investing in the new material economy. And yeah, that's it. I hope it was not too fast, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Malte. Let me give a little summary from the perspective of the Heliogenetic civilization of what I've understood, and then move into first question as a icebreaker for all of us. So what I've understood is that you're building a fund, a small fund. I remember 3 to 5 million to invest into startups in the construction industry that are using natural processes to create construction materials. And ultimately, your goal is to provide free homes to 300 million plus people who are about to lose their homes in the next decades. There,
Yeah.
this opens a huge question for me, which is how are you going from a small 3 to 5 million pre-seed fund into providing free infrastructure for all?
Yeah. Great question. Um, yeah, actually, first of all, like the first fund is dedicated to constructions only, and probably will be bigger within the next 2 years. This year, when we launch it, we mostly want to show that this is possible, what we're doing. So, prove most of the investors, okay, there is another world of materials, and we have to invest to like actually not get um dependent on China or other countries. And also, most of the countries at the moment, for example, in Germany, there's a huge construction stop because they don't get all the materials anymore. So we just want to prove, okay, this is actually possible for construction materials. It's an alternative that is more sustainable and also be on a competitive price. And then to get actually the pathway to free housing, um, takes a few years. But in my opinion, it will go by the following. So first of all, we have to prove that, okay, this is actually possible. And then we work with the foundation of Heliogenesis together, and we have projects that actually showing, okay, let's say we have a housing project and this is in you let's do it different. You try to build a house, and we say, okay, you can use the heliogenesis process for that, and you can save 50% on your construction materials with us. So this could be the first step for us just to show, okay, we have better materials. You can source them locally, and yeah, this is let's say the first step. Then and then the second step is um, can we make all the materials for free? And that requires like a bunch of other things. For example, what are local things that we can use? For example, is there any kind of soil or sand that's like free to use for building houses? And then identifying bacteria that we can add to it to strengthen the material, and then giving them the opportunity, like similar to what Simpler is doing, like a Lego block, for example, that they can build a house on. And then within the next few years, we could replicate that in more and more communities to actually achieve that 300 million of people could build their own homes with that material. And then within the foundation and also the fund, we probably provide them with like do-it-yourself kits, how you can grow your own house, let's say, um, without buying from a concrete manufacturer, for example.
To build on that question, um, a fund sits squarely in Horizon 1 from the perspective of the paradigmatic shift necessary from today's world into heliogenic civilization. Whereas building homes for 300 million plus people for free is definitely a Horizon 3 thing.
Yep.
How do you bridge this in terms of, first of all, financing, and then you pointed towards knowledge and process, but how do you move from
Mm.
um, profit-seeking
Mm.
financial vehicles into something
Yeah.
that actually allows this construction of free homes?
Yeah. So, like I said, in the phase one, let's say it's the Horizon One for a few years, where we identify the project and the research to make this actually possible. And that's the first phase to see, okay, company is growing and what we're building is feasible. And then the next step would be on, let's say, Horizon 3, we partner up with governments and local municipalities where we can actually say, hey, we're working on this for quite a few years. There's an example how you can build housing and the infrastructure for a little village. And we want to partner up with governments then to show actually, okay, if you partner with us, you don't have to invest in other things anymore. So then we have like a public good and private partnership with them. And then public goods, for example, can help us with building the infrastructure based on the companies that we invested in. So it can become something, yeah, it can become like their own flywheel between a public good infrastructure and a private good infrastructure.
Okay. So ultimately, you're building a bridge into public good commons, leveraging the trust that might be built throughout the process that this is actually a thing that this works, and then using that as a building block to move this into the wider public. So that's how I'm understanding it.
Yeah, mostly. Like because
Yeah.
when we talk with other like responsible persons in government infrastructure, it's like very hard to grasp at the moment. So this could be a very good way for the private sector to prove, okay, this is actually something that we can push forward. And then later the government or let's say the public makes sense of it and then widen it or distributed it to a country or on a global scale.
So I feel complete enough to open it to the space here. I'm pretty sure that some of you have questions or additional contributions. And I see Sander, you've raised your hand. Sander, please unmute yourself.
Well, thanks, you. Clear story. Can you explain how you talked about AI and how it can accelerate material science. I fully agree, but we also use AI to select potential startups and initiatives, right? And can you explain how that's done?
Yeah. So for example, what we're doing right now, we screen the global internet for keywords that could be relevant for our investment thesis. And then we monitor them for a while. We look if do they already have investors, who are the partners, do they have for example, a universal partnership already. So that's how we actually try to have a more efficient deal flow. Because otherwise it's super hard to find companies nowadays. Everyone tries to compete with like large investment funds, and we build with Catapult together this platform where we screen most of the startups, identify already the potential, see if they already have an investors, who could co-invest with us, to make it much easier to find startups and research in that area. So instead of having like 5 to 8 people who do nothing else than scouting and due diligence, we use AI for that, and we save a lot of time and investment for HR or for people.
And if the environment is optimal, the algae, for example, grow exponentially, right? And since Corona, most people understand what exponential mean. Is this a parallel to the material-based growing economy, as you mentioned?
I wouldn't say that everything is exponential, but the concept is very similar. So for example, if you grow other materials in a bioreactor, they also grow on an exponential level, but they also are limited by a lot of other things because you cannot just grow them wherever you want. So you have to have like bioreactors or a closed cycle kind of thing to grow the materials. But it's also just a question of like what kind of bioreactor you have and what do you use with it. For example, if you build, let's say, a biofuel or an alternative fuel, for example, if you use that fuel every day and you have one bioreactor, you can produce, I don't know, 5,000 liter every day, something like that, then it's producing 5,000 liters every day and you can use that every day. And if you need more, you can build like a second bioreactor, for example. For other things, for example, you build building blocks as bricks or roof tiles, for example. It can grow kind of in an exponential way because you have the bacteria that is like best for that certain material in that area, and then you just grow the bacteria and you can give it to someone else and they grow the bacteria and use it in the same area, and then it can grow on an exponential level, and you have like a huge region that has a similarity of soil, for example, to strengthen the soil for the building block. Then you have something like an exponential growth. Yeah. Jeanette, Julian.
Juliane, do you want to unmute
Yeah.
yourself and, if possible,
Yeah.
also show your
Yes,
camera?
yes,
Thank you.
I will. Malta, I would be interested to understand like how mature the companies are that you're working with when you're investing. Like at what level of development are they?
Yeah.
The ticket size is still relatively small, so they're probably early stage.
Yeah, most of them are early stage or even like in a research phase. So we allocated, I think, 20 to 30% for research only. So it's just like a research project that fits into the thesis of us. We try to finance that through grants. And then for startups, the investment could be something between 250 to 500,000 tickets. But they're pre-seed early stage, yeah. But most of the time they're a little bit more capital intense than software startup, for example. So they have to have like bigger tickets than usually.
Yeah. Do you have an anticipation on when they would like enter like a revenue stage from when you're investing? Like how far away are they from being like providing product that you can purchase?
I think that depends a lot on the specific target that you invest in. But the best case scenario would be within 2 to 3 years, probably. That at least they have like a revenue stream that they can calculate like the next seed phase or series A or B. But it should be enough money that if the next phase of their investment cycle, they could start making revenue plans, let's say. But in our stage, I think if you invest in an early stage company, you're probably like 2 to 5 years away of making money. Yeah, but it also means for us, first of all, if we really believe what they're doing and they can be an alternative for concrete, for example, the investment is on a high risk, but we can also make much more money as a return if like one of the companies actually succeed. And if that's the case, so for example, a concrete company has a bigger return, that also profits then again the non-profit that we have. So because the heliogenesis that was Thomas introduced last time should be able to be independent from anyone else, so that we don't have like funders or philanthropy kind of thing. So we can pretty much do whatever we want to. And that's why we try to have different projects that help to finance the nonprofit as well. And with an investment fund, this could be a good return in the biotech sector, probably within like 5 to 7 years. And so, yeah, also that's the fund cycle of us. It's like we aim for something between 7 to 10 years. So the investment period for us would be in the first 3 to 4 years, where we purely invest in the companies with the first fund. And then we rather raise more funds, or we just keep it small and see what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years.
What do you think the startups that you're investing in or potentially would invest in would need other than money? Like, what is it that they struggle with other than finding money?
There are 2 things that they struggle with as well. One is finding partners that they can collaborate with. So, for example, if they work on plastic alternatives, for them, it's very hard to find a partner that says, okay, yeah, we tried with you. So that's one thing that like that we're trying to help them with is distribution as well, like building a small local entity and connect them with, for example, larger corporation or other startups they could work with. And there's like partnerships with corporates, and the other thing is like go to market, because most of the, let's say, scientists that get an investment, they don't know how to run a company, let's say. So it's like 2 completely different things to do, and most of the scientists, they stuck into their like kind of thinking of like, okay, I'm running a lab, and to actually make it feasible and a product, it's a different way of doing that. And so I think those are the 2 things that they lack mostly without the financial incentive. And for research grants, it's kind of similar. When we started another project that is now leading a little bit into the Miracle Fund, we called NextNess a few years ago, where we actually starting to talk with all the scientists. And one of the major problem for them was that they had a great project and it got grants from university and larger corporations. And for example, a synthetic shell based on nacre, and it is lighter than carbon. It's nature-based to like the production is just using nature technology, let's say. And so it was a great product to have an alternative to steel, for example. And the problem with them to actually work further on that is that the main partners, they didn't invest in further research and development for that. So they were purely focused on, okay, this is great, what else can we do with that? And then a cosmetic company or another large pharma company says, hey, can we use that for drug development? And even if there's like a small chance, they invest rather in the pharmacy or in the drug development than actually in the material idea anymore. So even like in research, there's a huge gap between like investing in a good research project rather than let's say a corporate driven project. And we try to fill that gap as well a little bit with, okay, if we find research that needs funding and it fits into the material thesis of us, here's a bunch of money and you can work on that as well. And then later we can also invest into the companies if they think, okay, this could go and become a feasible company.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask Sebastian to unmute, or I am going to read your question in the chat. If you don't unmute, I will just read it. No, so you're
I'm right here. Yeah.
Great.
Hey, Malte, love the energy. I was making a bit of a fun comment there on Moneyball. It's a movie on baseball, and it's actually based on somebody who never knew anything about baseball really, but wrote an algorithm for sourcing the best players. So that, what I understood, is your plan to make money and then you have a strategy to invest that money. And maybe the first question you have answered in length now. However, the second one, I'm still curious about how do you intend to measure the ultimate impact, understanding that first you make money and the impact of making money is investing it into impactful projects. So how do you measure that impact?
Yeah, actually, this is probably a question in impact investing that we're asking ourselves for many years. How do you measure impact? So you can do like life cycle assessment. We developed something that we called heliogenesis impact calculation, where we have a bunch of questions to understand what will happen if this company is doing the same thing for, I don't know, the next 1,000 years. Is the materials that they use are biodegradable, and all those things. Because what does really impact mean? And for us, it's like freeing up ourselves from GDP. So probably for our fund, it's hard to calculate that, because that would mean that there will probably not be a potential buyer in the future for the company if we say that immediately. But for all the companies that we're trying to invest in, the best impact they could have is that more local communities using the open source technology to build actually materials in their environment. That is for me probably the best impact indicator, because if there's one company that is, for example, producing let's say fashion clothes, wool, something like that, but they grew that somehow in the lab, and then they give the same technology to someone and they can produce the same thing without extracting anything from earth. That's impact for us. So because you do two things at the same, or not only two things, but many more than that. Like, first of all, you grew nature somehow, so that has a huge benefit. People start caring about the things that they're growing, so it's different than just going to a store and you buy stuff. If you actually like participate in the process of building things, or even producing things, you have a different attachment to it. So people start caring more about the things that they're producing. So you change the social and environmental structure as well. And from that, like, you can go like into different pathways as well, what it will change for the society. But that's how I think it will have the biggest impact for us. So to answer it in a simple answer, is the biggest impact for me is that we have a material economy that is not related to our GDP anymore. That's impact for us.
Yeah, maybe if I can add, if a product is fully circular, used, so we use sun energy only, and the amount of users is growing, in what extent do you need to measure the impact? Because that's the line you want to accomplish.
Can you ask that again? I didn't get the question.
It was an additional answer on what you said. So, I think we are framed of we want to measure the impact because we compare it with something which is more or less good or bad for the environment. But if you aim at the fully circular economy, as heliogenesis is, and it's growing, that alone is the right indicator, I would say. You don't need KPIs.
Yeah, and then the other thing is you can have KPIs as well, Sebastian, but at the same time, like what I said in the first or second slide, it's okay. Impact for us as a fund means that we have free homes for hundreds of millions of people who have to move somewhere else through climate change. And currently, I don't see a path that we that will not happen. So there will be hundreds of millions of people that there probably will be climate refugees. And for us as a fund, it's like, okay, can we build something for those people. And if we succeed with that, that's impact for us. And it's like a clear goal or KPI objective for us to measure impact, in our opinion, because everything else is based on our principles, and it doesn't have a lot of negative effects on something, like even in a systemic view. So it's rather more beneficial if you produce a product that is, for example, it's a facade for a building, and it is not only more green, but it also has, I don't know, certain cyanobacteria in it, and it can actually produce oxygen as well, and it's like calming people down. Like with all those things, you have different kind of measurements that you have to integrate in that. So it's not only like a better material, but it's also like calming down people who just pass by. It is also reducing the energy cost of a building. It is also reducing the heat for a city. It is also a social factor because people start talking about it and it lifts up the mood. Like it has so many other benefits that it's, in my opinion, it's hard to measure all of it somehow.
Pauline, you have a question. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thanks, Malte, for the presentation. I would be interested in your research. Did you find sort of certain universities, countries, regions being more active than others? Can you already say there are sort of certain hubs and also topic clusters where you see, oh yeah, there's more activity in this than in that? And do you see gaps, right, in what's currently happening?
I cannot really answer that because I don't have all the data, but or we never really measured it on that. But from my gut feeling, I would say that we in Europe actually do a pretty damn good job in financing basic research for that. And most of the articles that we share and read, a lot of it is from universities in Europe. And there are also like a few private funded universities in the US that like many times have a very good research teams. The good part about the US is that if they have something, they get more private funded investors to actually go further with the research. That's something that we have a little bit of a lack here in Europe. So I talked with some research teams in Denmark and in Sweden, and many of them, they rather move to the US or to some other countries to further conduct their research because they didn't get the funding from their university anymore. So that could be a lack, but at the moment, I cannot really say if there's like a specific cluster or area that is doing extremely well in that field. Thomas knows a few people in Stanford. They're working on incredible, interesting stuff. When we did our talks with NextDesk and we talked with some researchers, we had some brilliant people from MIT who working on like different types of mycelium batteries, for example. And like, I think it's a very early stage of research still, so probably like 20, 30 years that most of them are in the game. So before I would say that there's like a big cluster of research in that field, it's probably hard to say. There's not not like thousands of researchers at the moment who are working on one specific thing. So there's some working on biomineralization, other working on bioelectricity or biomechanism. There's like one brilliant researcher, she's called Neri Oxman. She's a brilliant woman who's working on very similar things than we do. And she's also more public, so she has her own lab. So I think it's a cooperation or a collab between a private funded lab and MIT. So you see more of those things in the US. Like you have a few researchers who said, okay, let's raise 100 million for climate change. And then they have like kind of their own research labs. That's very unique for the US. you don't see that so many times happening here in Europe. For example, I forgot her name, but she is one of the inventors for the CRISPR technology. She started last year, I think, her own lab for using that technology for fixing climate change issues. And she got like a lot of money from the private sector. And I think as long as we have a huge public funded structure in Europe, it can work very well, but you have to get it out from the universities someday. And that's why we try to focus with the grants on like, okay, can we also privately invest in research? But yeah, that's my answer. It's not really answering your questions, but if I have more like a cluster or some research, I'm happy to share it. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there more questions here in the room today that you would like to ask? And is there any feedback, additional thoughts that you would like to add if you don't have a question? Please raise your hand if you do. It appears not. We can repeat the session. Oh, Juliane, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a brief offer with the background of my work. I basically help startups and scale-ups to expand to India. And in many ways, we share a very similar thesis of what kind of startups could be interesting for that. Materials, for example, for construction is something that I'd always be interested in. I understand that those that you're working with may not be ready to do so, but I'd love to talk more because ultimately there is scaling potential in India that has an effect not just in India, but that could have scaling effects in countries that are similar to India. And what I observe is that a lot of European tech doesn't consider countries that are like India in their initial thesis. And so sometimes it just makes sense to do some early validation to make sure in a way that can also be appreciated by these kind of countries to allow for fast scaling later on in those countries. So happy to talk more.
Definitely.
That's really
would be great.
Beginning of a conversation. But yeah, wanted to leave this
That's
with
great.
Thank you, Juliane.
Yeah.
Adi, would you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Good.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, Malte, thanks for the presentation. And sorry, I was with video off, just walking around. First of all, I want to congratulate you about this initiative. I think it's very much needed and very on trend in a way to create create more space for materials that are actually part of living systems. They're not against our planet. And I love how you also spoke about the benefits for humans rather than just the planet, because I think this is also a big point that we tend to miss in the construction industry, like how does breeding those materials or interacting with them affect us? So this is also very important. Some thoughts about, there is a lot of focus of where the materials are coming from, which is important, and also how to identify or filter which materials goes to which region according to climate and all that. But what we're missing is how long can it last? And this is something that in the past we had more respect for, like Thomas, like we talked before on our call. Like how can wood last 800 years instead of a few years, and then we have to replace it. So I would be very interested to see those algae companies not only creating a great product that people can grow, but also how long can it last, and what does it mean in the long run. And the other point that I would like to bring up, it's more like a comment. So I see a lot of spaces where people trying to build their own houses. It doesn't go well. We need help. We are detached from our bodies like never before. And most people don't know how to build a table, not to mention a house. So I think that looking into startups that also give some kind of solution for that, like creating more collaboration around the 3D printing space, and where like there is a lot of help, would help to bring this vision to life much faster than if we hope that people will build their own homes. Of course, in crisis, things are different, but you're talking on such a big scale. So I think the solutions should also be addressing that.
Yeah.
But all in all, I'm really looking forward to see where this is going to evolve to. And thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you. And you as an architect, you know all the difficulties of actually building a house. We talked a few weeks ago, or a few months even, with someone I think called Zach, who's a lot into like building houses and social housing especially. And he had some projects for refugees as well. And like having like a blueprint, for example, within this year where you can say, okay, for this environment, for example, in let's say India or Israel or some other countries where climate refugees are rapidly increasing within the next few years. Like, okay, in this environment, we need this, and that for a building. And then you can have kind of a blueprint for that as well. Yeah, let's see. Like, yeah. But to your first question, life cycle of materials. I think it depends a lot, like what do you want to build, in my opinion. So for example, synthetic nacre or any like a building block, for example, that is similar to concrete, like the algae one or the one from Zimba, they can last like extremely similar to current building materials. And some other materials probably have a lifetime of half of it or even less. But in my opinion, if you're able to grow materials that you don't have to pay all the time for, like doesn't really matter if it only can last for like 10 years. If you can just grow it in your apartment again and you can replace it very easily. Like how important is it in the fully heliogenous kind of society? Like does it has to be like Romanian concrete or bricks so they last for thousands of years or those kind of things? In my opinion, it doesn't have to be. So it can disappear and then the village moves to somewhere else and then we all become kind of nomads again in a few hundred years. I don't know yet, but it could be a possibility. And other materials, for example, bamboo, like you just replace every year your roof. In Asia, for example, like there are so many villages that you just replace the roofs every year and they're all fine with it. So it works well for a lot of countries. So probably there will be some materials that last a long time, other materials only last a few years. And if you want to have a home, you probably can decide by yourself what's the best solution for you. Yeah.
Thank you, Adi. Do you have a follow-up?
Always many, but for now we'll leave it there.
I'd like to point out Romke's question, and which is, so how do you plan to, or how do you think about the embedding into community and their infrastructure also from a cultural perspective. So how does that perspective of the social infrastructure, cultural infrastructure factor into what you're doing? I hope I got that right, Romke. If not, then please unmute yourself and.
Yeah, no, that was good. Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate that.
But to rephrase it again, what you mean is, what does it mean for culture, local community if they start growing their own materials, or how you can convince them to use alternative materials?
My question is more towards, like there was a really good book that was written around like the Syrian refugee camps and how they were taking materials and creating their own cultural aspects in the refugee camp to, continue to celebrate who they were in their design, right? And to honor the traditions that were included in their day-to-day lives and their history and how they implemented it into their community. And so just curious to see if there's a process or framework. And I included a couple organizations that think about this, like Design Justice has a whole process of when you're creating a project, here's some of the things to kind of think about to make sure that you are including that culture. Same thing with Who's Global Village. He has a lot of examples of his work in India and how he was able to kind of really spend time with the community to understand their needs instead of designing, towards them and designing with them.
Yeah, 100%. I think like if you really think about like, okay, you have a community that is already established, and it can be like a family, a village, a refugee community. You can give them like all the creativity they want to have, like because you're not limited by, okay, this brickstone is wet and it has to be wet because we use limestone and other materials. Like, okay, they want to have a different color because they use different materials. Okay, what can we change in that concrete? And also at the same time, can we use a different kind of bacteria or other thing, for example, to color the materials then? Whatever they want, I think it's like fully unlimited by that. So each local community can use the same material stack, let's say, but they can make it fully their own somehow. So I had that example here with some people I'm currently living in. Just imagine you redesign your kitchen here, and you say, okay, we can produce tiles with some soil that we have here, but we want to color them in different things. Okay, then let's start to color them in like hundreds of different colors, whatever everyone wants, and then you create like an art piece of it in the kitchen, and then you have a super colorful kitchen and everyone loves it. And you can do the same thing for the next kitchen, and they like it more black, and then they have a black kitchen. And the other one likes, I don't know, different 3D structure for their buildings, and they have maybe a little bit too much in the future, a few years, but then they have a 3D printer that use silk and other bonds, for example, to build like a new 3D architectural structure that they just came up with, because maybe it's an ancient kind of idea that they had. Hey, I dreamed about it. It has to look like this, and they had the idea of, hey, is it possible to structure our home buildings like this? And I think if we're able to design more with nature, and we use like architects more in that way, that they're not limited by the materials that they use. I think everything can be much more different in our world, and everyone can be more creative in their own way, and every community can design and create things in a different way. And I think that's beautiful.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to address right now? Anybody follow up here or opening something new? If not, I would like to ask you, Malte, how can people reach you? How can people reach Project Miracle to ask further questions, to engage?
Yeah, we have a website called miracle.blue, and we should have an email there, I guess. And otherwise, you can also reach me at malte@heliogenesis.io, which is the official Heliogenesis email.
Okay, so if there's nothing else, I will start saying some parting words for this session today. First of all, thank you so much,
I also have a
Malte.
newsletter.
I also have a newsletter. Okay,
well,
put a link.
Of course, I have a newsletter.
Put the link in the chat, man. Put the link in the chat so everybody can subscribe. So thank you, Malte, for sharing with us Project Miracle today. And thank you all for being here and engaging with this. If there are projects that you would like to see in this format on our Friday 1600 CET session, then please send them my way. And my way, if you, I think all of you have my contact. For those out there that might be listening to this, write to t@heliogenesis.io. And I'm happy to have a conversation around any topic to see if it fits in here. Having said that, next week we will be focusing on infrastructure of generosity and the pathway of agency and politics. We will be looking at a campaign currently unfolding in Germany. This is only the first of several perspectives into that. There are several campaigns unfolding at the moment in Germany at the same time, which we will all invite here to show they're working on. So if you're interested in the pathway politics to agency, join us next week, 1600 CET on session.heliogenesis.io. With that, again, thank you all for being here and making this happen.
Thanks, Thomas. Bye.